Okay, hi everybody. It's been a while since I've done one of these classes. I feel equally prepared and discombobulated all at once. Um, I'm gonna start with a little bit of background. I always start these classes by talking a little bit because that's what I do best. I just heard her say, I hope I heard right, that this class will be on YouTube after the fact. So I actually just put a few things on social media, Instagram specifically, like my messy workspace, a look inside some of the messier cookie areas in my house. And I'm pretty sure there's going to be questions on there like, hey, I'm at work. Can I watch this class later? It's going to be on YouTube. So you can watch it later if you happen to be on social media. I can't answer right now. I'll tell the people that might ask, let them know that it will be on YouTube. Okay, start with an introduction of me. My name is Callie. I am the blogger, the person, the rarely seen person behind the blog, The Sweet Adventures of Sugarbelle. It's called Sweet Sugarbelle now, but I've always kind of been fond of the name, and even more so lately because I've been thinking about it a lot, and it still is an adventure. Things change. Today's class focus, so whenever we do a class, like we always make something, and today we're making Scarecrow cookies, but there's always objectives that I have in mind that I want to teach you, because usually the most important things that come from these classes are the things that come out of my brain that I share with you as I'm teaching, more so than even the technique and stuff. I'm a notoriously simplistic cookie decorator on purpose. Like, I don't get crazy. I can't get crazy. I don't even like, I don't know if I'm capable, in addition to the fact that I just don't have any desire to get crazy. But it's not that I think that people shouldn't. It's just, I feel like my role as a teacher is to give you the building blocks and the stepping stone to know your options and to be creative. So as we go through this class, that's really what the focus is going to be. It's going to be a focus on creativity and options. A lot of times approach. If you have questions, please ask me. The moderators will let me know that you have your questions, and I will do my very best to answer them. Whenever I am teaching, I feel a little bit awkward if I'm not talking while I'm moving my hands, so the questions are welcome. This, I will say, it has taken me a long time to get used to doing these classes, but the more I do them, I enjoy them, because it is my nature to offer people that learn from me a very curated experience. And that's because I started as a blogger. So as I worked, I usually like tried to figure things out and give you step-by-step pictures of what's going to happen, what it's going to look like, and always best case scenario. But I think that that ends up frustrating people because they don't see a lot of behind the scenes things, like whenever I have to like slide my whole counter back so I can show you the airbrush, or the fact that I wouldn't normally do something maybe exactly how you see it in the picture, and not so much like the technique, but like I definitely don't airbrush in a wide open space like I'm about to 95% of the time. But I just want to go through and talk about things like that. And I want you to actually feel like you walked in my front door and you are sitting beside me decorating. Just maybe, I was telling the moderators earlier, like if my neighbor came over and grabbed me something and I'm in the middle of something, I want you to be able to walk up beside me and almost experience like it like that, which could be really cool or your worst nightmare, to be determined. But that's where we're going with this. Okay, to get started, today we're going to make Scarecrow cookies, and we have two options. This is the skull cutter from my 80-piece set that's now at Michael's. I think that's the one that I've talked about the least recently. Nothing to do with anything except I've got 3 teenagers and they're busy. But we are going to turn this skull, which can also be a lot of different things, into a scarecrow. I hope everything's connected. Kind of like this. This one's not finished, obviously. That's another new thing. Normally, I come to these classes with finished cookies, but didn't work out that way today. So we're really going to finish them together. Another option, if you have the stacker set from Michaels, it's got a similar cutter to this one. Sizing's a little bit different, maybe a little bit different on the curves. You can use that one as well. And then this second little piece that I keep holding up is the stacker flower that makes a great sunflower. But today we're going to start, like I said, usually in a perfect class, I like to start with everything made and just decorate the cookie real quick and show you what's happening. But today we're going to start by making the sunflower transfers that we're going to be using on the Scarecrow. This one here actually has one of those transfers. And then once we make those sunflowers, we'll start step by step with the cookies and build up. So let's switch views. That's my husband's department. And I'll show you what we're going to start working on. I know what I need. I need a cutting board out of the dishwasher. And I was really actually kind of discombobulated before we started because I was like, a big one. I was like, I'm forgetting something and I don't know what it is. And I just realized I'm forgetting the big cutting board. Okay, so what we're doing is we are going to start by making royal icing transfers. And the reason that we make royal icing transfers or the three reasons we make them is to prep ahead of time, to save on royal icing, like to use up colors you might have leftover brown or leftover yellow, and also to prevent cratering or disasters directly on a cookie, if that makes sense. So like if you want to make piped flowers like these, but you're not really confident, it's good to make transfers because if you do mess up, it's not on the cookie. Okay, so there is a link that Chesney, my marketing friend, I'm looking at everybody who's here too, so I can say hello. Hi, everyone. There's a link that she is going to share in the chat, and it's on my website. I can send it to you later, or I can add it to the bio in my Instagram, post it on Facebook. You can print out these 3 templates / transfer papers. This is for actually decorating the cookie. This one is to make sunflowers, and this one is to make scarecrow noses. We're going to start with the sunflower transfer. The way that I make transfers these days especially is I use a hard cutting board. This is a plastic one. I buy these at Target. I think they're like $9, $10. But they don't warp. I used to do my transfers on cookie sheets, but I found over time my cookie sheets were getting where they weren't flat. And on the cookies, it doesn't really matter. On my transfers, sometimes it matters if they don't lay flat. So I started using these cutting boards. I'm a huge fan. The next layer will be transparency sheets. And these are like you use on overhead projectors. That kind of gives away my age now. I'm pretty sure if you're in your 20s, you might want transparency sheets, or search Amazon. You can find these. You can also use parchment paper or wax paper. Both work, but experimenting over time, I've found that the fail-proof way to get 0 craters is usually the transparency sheets. So that's what I go with these days. Whenever I'm online and I talk about this, I do get questions about food safe, plastic, et cetera, et cetera. My advice to you, I looked it up. These transparencies are pretty much made of the same kind of plastic that goes into milk bottles and yogurt containers. At least the old school ones, like that used to have lids. I'm so old. And I feel safe using them if I wash them, because I think the food safety, from what I read, has a lot to do with the machinery and how clean it is. But if you're not comfortable with that, parchment paper, wax paper, and even food safe acetate, which they do make. I've tried it, I like it, but I've had trouble getting it shipped to me in good condition because it's usually large sheets and it gets wadded up in the mail. I'm securing the transfer to my cutting board with painter's tape, just like the Scotch brand painter's tape. Hang on, I'm looking to try to show you. And the reason for this is because whenever you are ready to remove the transfers, this peels up and removes a lot easily. If you don't use a tape that releases easily, a lot of times it doesn't matter, but if you're making something fragile, it matters a lot. So, okay, to make these transfers, see I've got a flat surface and I am using a thicker flood almost consistency, maybe thicker, 22nd. And if you're familiar with my blog, you'll know what that means. If you're not, it's an icing consistency that is about like, I'm going to say pudding-ish. The idea is you want it to flow a little bit, but not so much that it flattens completely out. And I'm starting with the middles. We have to make these sunflowers in steps because if you do them all at once, they'll kind of blob together. So I'm going to start with the centers, fill those in. Also, thicker consistency icing. I like it because it gives a little bit of poofiness, which is kind of hard to see. I'm going to turn this sideways, which is going to mess up my transfers, but you see that poofiness that we have here? Not too much. I made it thick enough that it didn't do too much. Let's go back this way. But you want that lift and that poof on your final transfers. And I know this is a decorate with me class, and I wish that we could do it in real time, but it would take a lot of prep. So I'll just tell you, we do speed this up for TV if you've taken any class before. But so we start with these middles. Once I finish all of the middles, I let them dry. And drying time depends on where you live, but basically we want this set enough that if you butt up the flower tips next to it, the brown icing doesn't bleed back into the gold icing. So once you've got all of these filled in, set them aside to dry. Like I said here, these will be completely dry in about 4 hours, maybe 8. The size of the transfer sheet is 8.5 by 11, normal sheet of paper size. And I don't know what size these are. I think they're about 3/4 of an inch. I have a blog post on my blog. If you search my blog for sunflower royal icing transfers with a little bit bigger size if you need them. But anyway, so we've got the middles down. Poofy icing. Another little tip before I move on, whenever I do this, I use a smaller opening tip on my squeeze bottle because it kind of pops the bubbles as it comes out, so you don't get any surprise bubbles. And one other thing, I got ahead of myself here. If you want to add fun little accents, you can take things like, this is brown sanding sugar, or clear works if you have clear, because it'll just show the icing. You can give it texture by sprinkling this on the little centers as you work. And that's really, it doesn't have to be that way. I just like sprinkles. And if you follow me on Instagram, you might have seen that I posted my sprinkle cabinet and the disaster and just the major excess it is a little bit ago. And the reason I posted that, first of all, to tell you, like, I have too many sprinkles, but I can't stop buying them. So I need to use them. And that's why I use them for applications like this. I like the texture, but I also like to use them since I buy them. But I'm going to turn this one more time this way. So we're going to set these aside and let them dry. I've got a sheet that I've done here to show you. And I've actually used some of these, but here's my sheet of already dry ones. Now we're going to put the petals on. And again, you can do this during your project, or you can get ahead and use it as prep work. I think depending on how you like to approach a project, it can feel tedious. I just like to make these so I have them ready. But
Holly, there's a question.
Yes.
Someone is asking if they can put those in the fridge to get them dry, or if they need to sit out.
They need to sit out. There's a lot of moisture in your fridge, and moisture is the enemy of royal icing. And so you don't want to put them in the fridge. Your safest bet is to not turn on your oven and just set them in your oven, because it's really dry in your oven and sometimes a little bit warmer, even if you turn on the light, or put them in front of an oscillating fan. Can we switch views where we're talking to my face? Or even a food dehydrator. Just the word of warning, my friend did this just the other day, and it's funny because I almost did. If you do put them in the oven, make sure you set a timer or write a big note on the front and tell yourself that they're in there, or you might preheat your oven and end up with a that smells like roasted marshmallows is what she described it as, but she caught it pretty early. It could be way worse. But so if you're drying these, don't put them in the fridge. They never need to be refrigerated, just out in open air. If you're in a humid place, the driest place you can find, or in a dehydrator. If you're somewhere like me, open air helps. I usually use fans to keep any flying things from landing, or because they don't like to be in the fan flow. And also it gives it that pretty shiny finish. Okay, now we're going to add petals. Do we have any questions before I move on? We're pretty good.
It looks like we're good right now.
Okay, perfect. Let's switch views again. Okay. Oh, I see my tip organization. We can talk more about that pretty soon too. I just grabbed a small petal tip. This is an Ateco brand, so it's called a 263. If you're going with other brands, it's usually a 65 or 65S tip. And that's what I'm using on these particular flowers. I do have a blog post that is solely dedicated to making these flowers. I think, Chesney, you'd probably have to search my website for sunflower transfers. If I'm going too fast or you need to see something else, you can always refer back to that or see this on YouTube. So anyway, for this size, I'm using a 65 or a 65S tip, and it's a leaf tip. Before we even start piping on these things, the best bet is to practice to make sure that your tip is doing what you want it to. And I'm going to do a practice run on a piece of parchment. You aim the tip down at about a 45-degree angle, and I'm talking like this direction. It's hard to show on a screen. And you squeeze, and as you squeeze, you pull away. And that way you can kind of see, that one wasn't very pretty, but I got the feel of it before I started on my actual petals. So I'm squeezing and pulling to a tip. I'm squeezing and pulling to a tip. So before you start on the petals, just practice on a sheet of paper or something. That'll save you frustration. And I'm going to add petals to these already dried ones. You can see I put sprinkles on some of them. These have nonpareils, but you can't see in the lighting, but just different kinds of sprinkles. Before I put the leaf tips on, using a small like brush to brush away the little crumbs so the icing doesn't get stuck, or the sprinkles don't get stuck in the icing. And now we are finally going to add petals. I think I see my husband's head drooping over there, which means I'm taking too long. This is stiff royal icing. I colored it gold. Did that answer the question, or? No, this is very stiff. I would say it's the kind of icing that you, if you put a spatula in and lifted it up, it's not going to fall back down. It's very stiff. In a minute, I'll backtrack and show you, because I'm actually kind of worried y'all can't see the piping that I'm doing. Let me move things. Okay, can everybody see? Okay, so see, I'm going right up next to this sunflower, the middle, and I'm doing the 4 opposite little triangles first, and then I'll come back around. So let's do this. I like to to move between and do 4 first and come back in a minute and do the other 4 to let the bottom set of petals just set a little bit so there's more dimension and texture. These are actually a little bit tougher to make than the bigger ones that I usually make, but I scaled them down for this cookie. I don't really think it matters if you go with the other template that I have that's a little bit bigger, if that's more comfortable for you, because I put an extra large, like double-decker cookie on the Scarecrow and it looks fine. So if this is a little bit too tiny for your comfort zone, feel free to go up. So while we're doing this, let's talk about what I'm doing. See right here, this one didn't quite come to a point. I know it's hard to see on camera, this little. I just touch it again and stretch it again. So let's talk through what I'm doing. I'm squeezing it against that side little dot and pulling away and letting go at the same time. And I'm going around to the first 4, squeeze, pull, and release. Actually, I like things like that. It's kind of like an exercise class. It's like squeeze, pull, and release. Or that's what, whenever I'm working out at my exercise classes, that's what those poor coaches try to tell me. Like squeeze, pull, and release. And I still can't deadlift, but I try. Okay. Did these 4 first. These have set a little bit. If you're working on a whole sheet, a few tips for your comfort. If you don't feel nimble enough to get in here, yes, it'll be on YouTube. If you don't feel nimble enough to get in the middle, just use the outside edges. But now that we've let these set a little bit, if you do a whole sheet, these are going to be darn near dry, at least where I live. You come back and fill in the other petals. So squeeze, pull, and release. Are we feeling like we're seeing this good enough, or do I need to change anything? And do we have a wish list of anything y'all want me to do different so you can see differently? See, now we've got a full flower. So we squeeze, pull, and release. Squeeze, pull, and release. Okay, good. I'm glad y'all can see this. Squeeze, pull, and release. It's like my instinct to hold it like right here where you can see, but we can't make the camera focus. I wish I could boost it up like way higher for you. Okay, squeeze, pull, and release. And I messed up a little bit, so I'm just going to pull that to a tip. I'll finish a few more. Does anybody have any questions before I move on with these? Squeeze, pull, release. It's our cookie workout. Squeeze, pull, release. And it's way easier than deadlifts. Why are deadlifts so hard? Like, I should just bend over and pick it up, right? But I get so nervous whenever I see the coach watching me, and I look ridiculous. Okay, last one. No, second to last one. Squeeze, pull, release. Squeeze, pull, release. My husband's my coach today, telling me if I get off the screen. So y'all let him know if I get where y'all can't see, and he'll straighten me out. Squeeze, pull, release. And normally I don't move this tray that much whenever I'm just sitting here working. I think I'm more aware of it because I'm talking to y'all. I did make a few bigger ones. If you do want to make bigger sunflowers, just change the tip to a bigger one, like a 66 or a 67. But just an FYI, the reason that I did this is because I used this tiny green I found it, flower cutter to make that flower. And I wanted to sunflower it, right? But I knew if I just put the icing straight on the cookie, I ran a risk of that cratering. So since I had this out, I went ahead and made 2 little poopy things to use as centers for this tinier flower so that I didn't have a cratered center, which is something I kind of hate. Some people, it doesn't bother me. I don't like it. But anyway, Same thing goes. If you make a lot of these ahead of time, you'll have them whenever you get ready to make little flowers like this, and you're really only making yellow icing. But anyway.
Callie, one question is, did you just print out the template and then put something over it, or is it just a sheet of papers?
It's a printed template that I printed. The link Chesney has, she can put it in the chat, and I put a transparency sheet over it. Let me change views to show you real quick. Just one of those like they used to use in those overhead projectors that are from my generation. I ordered them off of Amazon because if you go buy them in an office store, they cost like $25 or $30 or $40. And if you order them off of Amazon, they're like $12. But I just put this over it. If you are not comfortable using transparencies because they are not certified food safe, you don't have to. I've checked on the plastic. It's very similar to what yogurt and milk containers are made out of. It is, but it's not made on certified food safe equipment. So I always wash mine first. If you don't want to do that, that's okay. You can get a similar product called food safe acetate, but it comes in gigantic sheets, and I've never had any luck getting it to me that it hasn't been creased and wrinkled, which defeats the purpose. So you can go with transparencies, you can use wax paper, or you can use parchment paper, whatever feels most comfortable to you. But you run the risk of cratering with the parchment and the wax paper. But if it does, that's the beauty of this. You make so many, you can pick off the good ones and still avoid the craters. But I just like the transparency sheets because it's consistent results every time. Now,
okay, sorry, one more question.
Oh, that's okay.
The flowers, how hard do the flowers get? Are they like a biscuit consistency when they get dry, or what is the consistency like?
They're like a foamy candy, like a meringue, but that depends on your icing recipe. My icing recipe, my kids, I made a bunch of pumpkins the other day, and they were popping them in their mouth, and they're softer than candy buttons. But I'll show you a little bit down the line as we work. I attach them using icing versus dropping them into the wet icing, so they're easily removable if somebody is not comfortable eating them. That was a really, I don't know why I dictated it like that, but let me switch views real quick and I'll show you something else. I'm gonna try to break one to show you. Like if you look on the other underside, it's still pretty foamy down here. And like I can break it easily with my fingers. So like I can literally like smash it with my fingertips. So it's like softer than hard candy, but it's not soft. A lot of times whenever you put it onto the icing here, the moisture from that icing comes up and softens it. So if you're scared about putting them on there, you've got options. We'll talk about that. You can do something else, or just test them at home before you put it on there, because I have strong opinions about hard things on cookies. And so it's really personal preference. But okay, I'm going to tell you one more thing before we move on with the steps. Let me brush off the little crumb I got on his nose. The reason that I showed you these little flowers, these cookie sunflowers, while I was doing this, is because it is the same technique. It's just on a cookie. So I basically made the transfer, stuck it on the cookie, and added the leaves. Okay, on to the next one. Now that we've got the petals on, these will dry. Dry time is completely dependent on where you live. Where I live, I basically live in the kind of desert, and so they'll be dry like fast. But if you live somewhere wet, like put them in the most not moist, I hate that word, sorry, the not humid place that you can find in your house to dry, or put them in a food dehydrator. A lot of like sorry, there's the top of my head, chronic cookie decorators, can I call us that? But a lot of people that decorate a lot of cookies go ahead and get a food dehydrator. I use a fan, but I do want to take a minute to show you what happens to these whenever I take them off. This is almost a class on royal icing transfers, I think, but just so you can see, and then talk a little bit about storage before we hit the cookie really hard. A lot of information. Let me see where I'm at. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to peel these off. See how easily the painter's tape comes off? That's why I use that. You lift it up and away. And you can, if you like them on here, you can leave them on here. I find did you see my runaway little flower? They come off so easily that you probably won't store them on there. But to get them off, especially since these aren't super duper fragile, I just roll it. And then I end up with this pretty little field of sunflowers. Ta-da. And see how easily those come off? I know I'm going to get storage questions for these. Where I live, I can just like put them in a bowl or a box or a bottle like this, and it's going to be fine. If you live somewhere humid, another quick tip. I told you this is so much information. I hope y'all are digging this. You see these packets? I obsessively collect these. They're gel silica packets. I don't know what silica gel. I don't know the other names, but basically they're absorbent. So you find them in products that people ship that they don't want to mold or have moisture in them. You can find them in pill bottles, crackers. They come in my vitamins. I work at a home store, and every single basket that I touch has these in them. So if you have trouble with humidity, you can put these in a container with these gel silica packets, save every one, and that should keep them pretty dry. Change them out every once in a while. And you don't even have to pay for these, just snag them where you get them. Like I said, they're in everything. Medicine. Ta-da. Okay, so now we have 1 million sunflowers. I'm going to put them in my little sunflower bowl. I'm actually going to save these for my friend because she uses them. She makes a lot more cookies than I do. And let's get to work on our scarecrow, finally. Thank you for being patient while I spent so much time on transfers, but I think they're really important because a lot of times I'll get questions where people ask like, how are your cookies so perfect? Why did this not happen? Why didn't you get cratering, et cetera, et cetera? And that's why, like little tricks like using the transfers. And besides the fact, they're such a time saver and they keep you from wasting things. And I always love that. I don't like to waste icing and stuff like that. And the more creative you get, you can make transfers for anything. It doesn't have to be sunflowers. It can be carrots. It can be little dots for Lego cookies or whatever you're making. But okay, so now I talked so long about transfers. I feel like I need to get a move on it. This is also a printable template. They're offered in the link that Chesney has on my blog. And I'll show you how we use these. There's always two on a page. One is to pop in your projector if you have an old school projector like I still do. And one is to use it to sketch your design on your cookie before you start. The reason I do this is because I think a lot of times whenever people decorate cookies, they don't like the final product because they're not uniform or they think they don't look perfect or professional or whatever word you want to use. And I try not to shoot for perfect because I have perfectionist problems, but I do see, I think what people mean whenever they say they're not perfect is that they're not uniform. And this is a quick way to help people get that look without having extra equipment. And it's kind of a confidence booster because I think it's like, if you look at a blank cookie, you're kind of like, oh, what do I do with this? And then if you have these guidelines, it's a little bit more like coloring. So it's basically like starting with a white sheet of paper versus buying a coloring book. And I think it makes it more enjoyable for some people. And it's kind of like training wheels on a bike, except in my case, I never stopped using the training wheels, but that's okay because we all do our thing. Okay, if
Holly,
you see,
there's a question. Sorry.
Yes.
Someone asked, what thickness are your cookies?
They're 1/4 inch thick rolled. They puff up a little bit as they bake. And I'm going to say rise, not puff up, because they don't spread very much at all. And the baking powder does that. There's huge debates over baking powder versus not baking powder. But just to show you, like mine don't spread much. They're not exactly the size of the cutter, but there's not much spread. But a good 1/4 inch. And if we have time in a little bit, I'll show you the rolling pin that I use to make that possible. Okay, so this template is going to help me make the lines to follow on my scarecrow. I'm using a food color marker to do this. And see, I'm just lining it up here, and I'm gonna use a food color marker just to trace the lines. Sometimes you don't need lines like this if you feel confident, but sometimes you do. This one's pretty simple. You might not need it, but in this, I still provide them. So you have that guide. One other thing I wanted to talk about, so we're interrupting decorating again. I hope this doesn't wig any of you out. We're gonna bag icing real quick. I just wanna show you a quick little tip. I usually do this in all of my classes. And I wanted to talk about this icing. This is tan icing. It should be that color, right? But if you look at it, even in my poor lighting, you can tell it looks pretty orange. A quick trick to fix that is to put a color that is opposite, like a contrasting color on the color wheel to into the icing, and that'll tone it down and it'll mute the orange color. In this case, since it's looking pretty orange, I'm just gonna put, actually I'm scared to put a drop of blue because I can't tell if it looks reddish or orange. I'm gonna put a drop of teal in here. Carefully, don't do what I just almost did. I was gonna put the whole drop in here and I was like, that's kind of dumb because a lot might come in. Put a teeny tiny drop on a spatula like this, and then stir it into your icing after you see what's going to happen. Don't just like do what I was about to do, because that would have been something, if you were sitting at my house, I might have been like, crap, why did I do that? But okay, so a little bit of icing color on here. Put the teal in there. At first it's gonna scare you because it's gonna look like that, but it's going to neutralize the color enough to tone it down to a not orange, to like a more tan. And I could see it immediately here. It's a little bit harder to see because of the lighting. Let me see if I can get it in any scenario where you can see. Did y'all get that visual, or am I trying to show you something that the screen's not going to let me show? See, I added a little bit more because I want it a tiny bit more muted. But if your icing looks too something, so like if you have icing and it looks a little bit too bright blue for you and you don't want it to be bright blue, Google a color wheel, pick the color across from it, and then add a tiny bit of that color until it mutes it enough or tones it down that you like it. And this is actually, like, I wish that you could see it how I'm seeing it. This is a really pretty tan color. It went from almost orange to, I just can't get the good light to show you, but that muted it a lot. So anyway, if your color is too much of something, complementary colors, tone it down. Now we're going to make, this is another important tip. If you've been to a lot of my classes, I know you probably want to kill me right now, but if you're new to this, this is really helpful. We're going to use a spray bottle. This is my fancy one. You don't need this one. I just grabbed it. And we're going to adjust the consistency of the icing by using the spray bottle. The reason we do this is because it's really easy to over thin your icing. Plus you have to stand at the sink to do it. If you have a spray bottle, you can just really fine tune it with a lot of accuracy. So this is about piping consistency right here. Let me see if I can get an angle of this to show you what I like. Here, will you change views for me? Let's do it this way. Piping consistency is kind of like toothpaste. This is the best way I can show you. You can do second counts, but if you just hang it up on the spatula, it's going to fall eventually. That may even be a little bit thick for me, but if you go a lot thinner, it's going to, you risk getting craters in your piping or brittle piping that might chip off. So that's about what I go with. We'll switch views one last time. I think y'all might be getting seasick about now. And if my beautiful assistant will hand me my press and seal wrap, we'll make an icing pod really quickly. I have no strong opinions. If you like tipless bags, just disregard all of this. This is called the saran wrap tip. I do this because it makes cleanup easier and I can use my disposable piping bags almost forever. I actually broke one today and it was weird. Like it happens so infrequently. It's probably like 10 years old now. But you put a little bit of icing in a press and seal or a plastic wrap pod. I've got a blog post on this too. Fold it kind of corner to corner, seal it up, wrap, twist the ends, and then you put that in the bag. Show you in just a second. Meanwhile, while we wait, I'm going to thin the rest of this tan icing to put in a bottle. And that's what we will flood with. And for flood consistency, we're going kind of like shampoo-ish. We'll switch one more time where I can show y'all. Always mix in measuring cups because it helps like gauge how much icing I'm making. You don't have to do that. I just like the little handle. And let's, okay, consistency wise, see, we're talking like, is this honey? Is it shampoo? What would you call it? Shampoo? My lovely assistant says shampoo. So we thin this icing out and we'll use this to flood with. I have done this with almost every single color that I've made. I just usually do this ahead of time and it makes for boring television, but I think it'll help you in the long run to see what I'm working with. And just to be clear, royal icing is a medium, and so we all have our own preferred way to use it. And if this doesn't work for you, that is totally okay. I'm not going to get mad. I'm not going to tell you you're doing it wrong. You really just need to figure out what works for you. Like I decorate with a friend of mine, and it horrifies her how thin my flood icing is. And it's not right for her, but it works for me. So that's what you have to do as a decorator. And I always want to make sure I express that. Like if I'm doing something that, don't do that, you're driving me crazy, that is okay. Do it how you think it's right, because that's what's going to give you the best results and work for you. Okay, let's switch views again. Okay, got my cool little pod. I've got my pre-assembled bag. I just stick it in there. And make sure that the icing, the color goes a little bit below. And I use these bag ties, some sort of bag secure thing. I use these bag ties to secure it. Then we're going to clip off the end and add a tip and get started. Okay, so clip off the end. I'm going to add the, this is going to be a number 2 tip for the outline. You can use a 1, a 2, a 3. 3s adds a thicker layer of icing on. Whatever works for you. 2 seems like a comfortable medium for me. And now we are going to outline the hat. And whenever I outline a cookie, I always pick like a corner junction, like a natural junction. And whenever you're outlining, you lift up and away from the cookie. You don't ever like drag it across the surface, because if you drag, I want to do it to show y'all, but I don't want to mess up my cookie. If you drag, it's not going to be that plump, like dam of a line that you need to hold the icing in.
Callie, there's a question here. Someone is asking why their icing is turning elastic when they thin it.
Now say it again.
Someone is asking why their icing is turning elastic when they thin it.
Ooh, what recipe do you use?
We'll wait to see what they say.
Yeah, let me think on that one because I don't have a knee-jerk reaction. Like I almost wonder if they're using like a Franken frosting or a glaze. And I think my husband said, did you say my head was in the way to see this piping? Okay, I'm gonna take this off and do it again since my head was in the way. Okay, see this little stick? We call this a boo-boo stick casually, or it's the nice little nickname. It's called a 2-in-1 tool, a food pick / scraper. That's what that's for. So if you make a little boo-boo or a mistake, you can use that to scrape it off. And since I'm going to be scraping this cookie anyway, I'll do it wrong one more time just to demo purposes, and then we'll do it right. Okay. See this cool little tool? If you do need to scrape your cookie, wait a minute or two for the icing to get a little bit harder because it's easier to scrape. If it's set a little bit, it'll kind of pull off in bigger pieces. Just a pro tip there. You don't have to, but it's less mess. Okay, if you drag, I'm going to start again. If you drag your piping against the cookie as a guide, you're going to have like this result. It's pretty flat. Anytime that you pause or hesitate, do you see that messy line? That is if I drag. Let me see if I can do it this way where y'all can see. If you drag, it just doesn't work. Do you see the mess it kind of makes? Can y'all see? If you want that really pretty, clean outline, let's scrape this off with the boo-boo stick again. Again, if I hadn't spent so much time telling you about transfers, I would give this a minute, but this is also a really good example to know that just if you mess up on a cookie, it's not toast. You can start again. Ta-da.
Okay, so it looks like we have the answer for the recipe. So they said, my recipe is the normal royal icing, but I start by putting water to my meringue powder, then I add the icing sugar.
See, I do it the other way. I mix it all at once. Let me think on that because I don't have a good, I actually am going to have to tell you, I don't know the answer to that. I can't think of it right now. So let me think. If I come up with something better, I'll get back to you. And leave a question on the post on Instagram for this, and we'll talk about it a little bit because maybe even somebody in the chat understands or has had that happen. I wonder if it needs to mix more, or I'll have to think about that question. That's not a off the cuff one that I can answer. I am so sorry. I wish I knew. But see how we're outlining, we're lifting up and away. And again, I started at this natural junction. Ideally, whenever I, can I have a bottle with a top? One of these. Ideally, whenever I decorate cookies, I let this set up for a little while, maybe like a minute or two at least, because it will, if you don't let it harden, it'll kind of push the dam off the edge and it'll leak over the side. And if you let the outline set up, then you don't normally have that problem unless you overfill, and that we'll talk about that. I'm going to switch views one more time. I'm about to flood this, and remember the icing that we talked about? I let it sit so that it had time to thin a little bit more. Another thing that's good about letting it set is that all the air bubbles will rise to the top. And so whenever you pick it up, you can use a spatula to gently like smash out those air bubbles while it's resting. Keep it covered because royal icing will crust. And then once you're ready to flood, like everything's outlined, you fill the bottle. I like icing bottles. Like I said, there's different techniques that if you read anything about cookie decorating, you're going to get a lot of information. This is what I usually start with because outlining and flooding are usually the easiest consistencies to learn. And then you can move on to like one consistency icing. But I'm afraid if I start talking about that, we'll get off track. But anyway, these icing bottles that I'm using here are the ones that I designed for cookie decorating. Before, whenever I first started decorating cookies, we didn't have very many options. You had chocolate decorating bottles, and either they had really wide necks, but no option on the tip, or they had really narrow necks and you could change them, but it's hard to get the icing in there sometimes. So these have wide mouths to help with that. I'm going to put a number 1 tip on this bottle. And Coupler, did you give me one? See, I told y'all I forgot stuff. Today I felt it. This is like real life cookie decorating, because this is how I do. I'd sit down and be like, man, I got everything but that one thing. But okay, we're going to switch views back. First step is called outlining. Second step is the flooding. And that's what I'm doing here. I'm going right around this outline. And filling it in. Whenever I flood it, I leave like just a little bit of space like that. That's kind of how I can gauge that it's not going to run over. I leave just those few little holes so that whenever I start using an offset spatula to move things around, which is also a hotly debated topic. I can't work without this thing. It's like missing a hand if I don't have one to decorate cookies with, but a lot of people aren't a fan. But this is kind of my personal Jedi magic trick to getting the invisible outline, because I can use my offset spatula to kind of push the icing over the edges. And that's just the look I like, and a look some people go for. So I have to have this spatula. But we've drawn the template on the cookie. We've done the hat. Once you outline and flood, this is going to have to dry just like the transfers, and you'll have to set it aside for probably at least 4 hours. And now we're going to do something I don't think I've ever done on a Michael's class before, and we're going to airbrush. So for this guy, I used an airbrush to put this texture on his hat, the burlap look. And I'm going to take a quick intermission. If you have any questions, now's a good time to ask, but I'm going to slide things out of the way, because for the airbrushing, I'm going to need to at least spread a towel out because it's a little bit messy. So we're going to take a quick little intermission for setup. First things first, in the real world, if I was doing this, thanks, Sally. Okay, I just realized I'm going a little bit over, but first use an old towel or something. In the real world, can we change the camera angle one more time? See, told you, casual class. In the real world, I have like a little trifold poster board, and I set up a towel, and I use the trifold poster board to make sure that airbrush spray doesn't get everywhere. People are really terrified of airbrush spray. It's not always that bad if you properly prep. The way that I'm about to do it, I might make a little bit of a mess, but it's nothing like life-changing. I just want to warn you. But okay, let's set it up and let's get after it, because I talked a lot. Okay, we've got our dry cookie. I'm just going to go straight on the towel here. We have the Sweet Sugarbelle Stencil Snap. This is just a holder that holds stencils in place. There's a couple of different brands on the market. All of them are good. And I didn't have a burlap stencil, so I decided to use wood grain. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to snap this stencil into the frame, and the magnetic side holds it together. Then you lay it over the cookie, kind of line up things how you want it to go. I'm using the screen versus like my actual eyes. The stencil snap has some features that I want to explain, but I'm going to try to make it quick. There is a thick side and a thin side. If you have a thicker cookie, you use this side or the thinner side, depending on what you need to do to make the stencil flush. But the idea is just basically to get it laid on there and get it flush. That's what the stencil holder does. In the old days, we had to balance and use magnets and stuff like that. And then a bunch of smart people made tools for this, and it helped a lot. Just using a simple airbrush pen. I think Michael's has one. I think it's Sweetshop brand. Chesney, you might look and see in the links if they have one. And then airbrush color. Number one tip, before you start airbrushing, same as icing, don't start on your cookie until you've tried it. Okay, so I've got the cup here. I don't think I've airbrushed on camera really before. I'm putting a few drops of color into my little bowl. I think there's a name for that, but it escapes me right now. And I'm just going to spray on my paper to see what kind of color and pattern I'm getting. There's a lot of things that can happen with airbrushing, so I'm not going to go into all of them, but the biggest tip is if you're getting a spattery spray, make sure you turn your knob. Let me see if I can show you. Whoops. All the way up to plus. I just turned it way down to show you what'll happen if it's not completely up. You see that spatteriness? That's because it's not turned on high. If I turn it all the way back up to high, we're going to get that clean, like pretty airbrush look that we're actually going for. Sometimes I think that little spatter effect is cool if that's what you're going for, but most of the time that's not what you want. But test it before you go on your cookie. Ta-da! I feel like we're safe. And then I'm just going to hold the airbrush high above the cookie. I'm going to say about 6 inches. And the key is to chill. That's the best. Anytime that you're airbrushing, remember me saying that, like chill. So I sprayed it, see? And then I'm going to lift it up to show you. You have to be kind of quick and kind of precise. Just lift it up. Don't think too hard. And you get that pattern. Perfect world. Like I said, I would wait longer because this is still a little bit wet. Actually, I forgot. I made a cookie like that. Let that kind of dry a little bit and then come back. Turn this wood grain stencil. That was another thing. We're being creative with the wood grain stencil because I didn't have burlap. Then you come back and spray it the other direction, and that's going to kind of create that burlap pattern. And again, like chill. Don't pull the button wide open. Don't like douse it with color because it will leak and seep. I may actually do it on purpose to show you what happens in just a second. And something else I did the second time around, I didn't like how my first cookies turned out, the ones that you can actually look at on Instagram, because the burlap pattern looked too checkery, too empty like this. And the second time around, I realized I didn't have to have a special stencil. I could just go back and weave it one more time to get a little bit more pattern on there, or a different sort of pattern. And anyway, I'll eventually, if this dries, turn it one more time. Let's do this one. You will have to clean your stencil in between cookies, probably every 3 or 4 cookies. If you plan on making a lot, I'd just buy multiple stencils. Sometimes that seems easier than working between 2. But just to get that full pattern, not having a burlap stencil, I just kind of went through here. Now I posted something on Instagram, and I am officially over, I think, in class time, but We're in it for the long haul. So if you don't have time, you can check it on YouTube. I apologize that I went over. Lack of too much talking on my part as always, but I want to show you on Instagram. If you go to my Instagram page, I've posted a few examples, and the first picture is a picture of that 2 open weave that I talked about that I didn't like too much because it just wasn't full enough. Adding that one other layer was kind of my cure for that. But swipe a little bit further. If you don't have a burlap stencil or you don't want to use an airbrush, you can use any stencil. This is a basket weave, and I used Icing in this case because I don't even know if I had an airbrush back then. I don't remember, but you can do Icing if you're scared of airbrush mesh or you don't want to have one. You can actually use piped icing, the same tan outline icing I used here. You could just pipe it over to create that effect. My heart rate's changing. Or another solution that I really, really love, this is one of my favorite techniques. You can add cheesecloth to like an embroidery hoop and airbrush over that. And I have a blog post on my blog. If you search burlap bunnies by Sweet Sugarbelle on my blog or on Google, it should come up. It'll look like this, and it'll show how to also get that pattern. So the moral of that story, the point of what I'm trying to say is that even if you don't have all of these exact supplies, or you don't have a burlap stencil, you can use cheesecloth, or you can use a wood grain stencil. You can use the tools and supplies that you have to still make something amazing. And I sometimes think decorators forget that. Like, we always want to go buy new things, and then we don't end up doing things either because we get overwhelmed with supplies or because we don't think we have enough money to do it. But with a little bit of creativity, you can make the idea work on your terms. See, this one's fun. It's kind of funny. It went from little hatch crossing to burlappy looking. Okay, so on to the next step before, again, I feel kind of terrible for keeping y'all so long. We've got ivory icing, and I think I'm just going to leave my towel here. Pardon the lack of presentation, but I don't want to spend a lot of time shuffling stuff at this point because I'm getting to the point where I'm losing everything. You see scissors by any chance? See, this is like how it really works here. I'll be like, hey, babe, do you see what I did with my scissors? And because I managed to lose them. And I can't find them. I bet they're buried. Found them as he handed me the other pair. Cut the little tip off of my prepared bag. Add a number 1 tip. And we're going to do the same thing that we did the first time around. And we're going to outline and flood the face. This time everything's prepped though, so there won't be any waiting. See, whenever I get rushed, which does happen a lot in real life, things get rowdy and I start getting messy. And that's when I make the big messes. So we're going to outline the face. Let that set. I am going to just go rogue and fill it in so you can kind of see the next steps, even though it's a terrible idea. Don't do this. Just give it the 2 to 5 minutes it needs in real life. And also it would be a good idea to let your airbrushing dry more so it doesn't bleed into this. We'll talk about that in a minute too. Anyway, so we're going to flood. Same thing. I go right up to the edge.
Someone has a question. They are asking, is it easier to use the bottles for flooding? I'm wondering if that's compared to a piping bag.
It's personal preference. If you want to use one consistency of icing, the piping bags make more sense. If you like this thin flood icing that I like, The bottles are easier because if you don't use a bottle, you're going to be constantly shuffling the bags to make sure that stuff isn't flowing out of them because they will leak. So for this, the consistency flood icing that I like, the bottles make more sense. Okay, I'm using my offset spatula again to just kind of make sure the icing is flush.
Another question, what kind of material is used to wrap the icing?
That is press and seal wrap, but it's basically plastic wrap. You can use any sort of saran wrap. I have a blog post related to that. It's called Press and Seal Icing Pods. Chesney, if you get a chance, grab a link and maybe that'll help kind of explain it because it's step-by-step pictures. Okay, I flooded my face and luckily it's staying where I want it to temporarily at least. Now I'm going to use black sugar pearls to make eyes with. I use these little forceps style jewelry tweezers because they give me the most precision. I actually have a plastic pair in a kit that is at Michael's that works really well too. Truth be told, I have some, I just don't know where I put them because I do stuff like that. But we drop in the sugar pearl eyes and now we're going to get to the nose. You've got two options putting this on. I'm actually going to attach it after the fact to a dry cookie, but again, we made transfers. The reason we do this is again, like if you put the nose on this cookie while the icing, this ivory color icing is semi-set, like hard but not completely dry, your chances of cratering are smaller, but there's still that chance. If you do this, not only are you using leftover icing, you can go through and pick, sorry if I'm making y'all seasick, the most perfect little triangle, exactly the one that you want to put on your cookie. And in this case, right now, I'm liking this one. These are, I don't know what brand, no, I do know, I actually do know. They're PME brand. I got them from Semi-Sweet Mike's shop. Okay. See how easy these things pop off? Okay, so this is the triangle I'm selecting this time. This is why we make transfers, easy peasy. It's like a sprinkle. I actually had some triangular orange sprinkles I really loved, but they don't make them anymore. You could drop this onto this icing. I don't really like to do that. Just again, it'll probably sink and I won't like the look. So I'm just going to attach it to a dry cookie. But most of the after work, you do have to let the face dry again. And that's the hardest part about cookies with royal icing. There's a lot of downtime with the drying in between steps. I think some people don't expect that and they get frustrated. And you can work around that with like trying different designs and stuff, but I used a small dot of icing to kind of attach that. And before I move on, I do want to touch on one other thing. If you look at my cookie where I've airbrushed, see it's kind of sticky and tacky and not drying. Sometimes that happens. I'm sure there's a really good answer, but I'll just make it quick. When this happens to me, sometimes I use either a piece of parchment paper or like a paper towel and I kind of blot it like lipstick. And if you see, like some of it came off on my parchment, but the easiest thing to do to prevent that is take good old cornstarch. And I just take a little tap of cornstarch, tap it here and dust it on the cookie with a brush and it instantly kind of mattifies it. I see a lot of conversation in my Facebook group about people who get really frustrated with airbrushing because once you bag it, it can stick to the bag. This is a tip to kind of prevent that. It doesn't always work. It's just one of those frustrations with airbrushed cookies. But if you want to take the stickiness away, if you, can you even tell by the screen that that it really like took the stickiness down 17 notches. I just messed up my cookie to show you, but you can even see the difference in the shine. But little side note. Now going back to finishing up this cookie, because I went way over. I've never done this before, y'all. We'll add the last few details. And this is what that looks like. First, I'm going to use like cornflower bluish icing and a small tip to just kind of make this little like stringy hat band. And I'm going to add a little bit of extra icing there. And we have two choices. You can either use the pretty transfers that you made, or you can use a cookie. And since I already did this one, I think I'm going to use a transfer this time. And this is what I was talking about making it where it's removable. If you drop it on like this, then if somebody wants to eat it after the fact, they're pretty easy to pop off if you don't want that kind of crunch on your cookie. And now that we've got that little part attached, and these final little details, it doesn't really matter a whole lot the order you do it in, minus the hair, which will be last. Can I have a coupler ring out of that little bin over there? Now we're going to finish up with the, oh, go ahead.
There are a couple of more questions real quick.
Go for it.
So someone is asking, what brand are the pearls? I've had problems with color bleed from the pearls into white icing before.
I like the PME brand. I got those from Semi-Sweet Mike's shop. Those are the ones that consistently don't bleed for me. But search PME brand, and those are pretty good pearls. I like them.
Okay, and then one more. They're asking on Amazon to find those transparency sheets, what to search, or where can they find those exactly on Amazon?
Hi, Kim. I want to say search overhead projector sheets or clear transparency sheets. I'll look and find a link. We can probably put that. Can we put that in the YouTube comments after the fact? I'll find a link for y'all because I just bought some. While we're talking questions, I'm going to use this a small tip. This is a 1.5, also PME, but a 1 or a 2. I'm just going to finish out this cookie with a little bit of detail, and just kind of like to finish it up and give it dimension. I'm outlining the part of the hat that kind of gives it some dimension there. And then did Chesney, did you happen to have a link for overhead projector sheets?
I can look real quick and grab one.
Okay, if you can't find one, that's okay. But Bernie can also text you one. We can text you a link that works.
Okay, there is another question that came through, actually two. One is asking, can we store these cookies and for how many days?
These cookies have a good shelf life. They have a shelf life up to like 2 weeks. You can store them in an airtight container in a week is what I kind of feel comfortable with. If you put a slice of bread in there, they stay fresh and soft. But if you want to store them longer, you can get little like treat bags and heat seal them in there. And really, it's personal preference. I always tell people to package yourself some and then write 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and then taste them once a week. I mean, worst thing, you get a cookie every week, and then kind of find the threshold to see when you don't want to give people your cookies anymore because you don't like it. I'm showing you all my tip storage really quickly. We're going to put the little hay sticking out like hair detail on the Scarecrow. I'm going to use, I think, a 21 tip, but it's an open star. I think if I said that wrong, don't make fun of me. But I'm using a star tip, a larger one. You can use a 32 or a 21, 18. They go all the way down to 16 and 13. I just wanted to flash my tip storage here so y'all know it's not pretty, but it works. I also keep sprinkles in these. But I'm going to use this large star tip, which is about a 21. Yep, 21. To add a little bit of hay puffing out of his hat. Let's do this.
One more question for you while you're going. Can we put cornstarch on the cookie if it's not dry enough and still sticky after the airbrush?
Oh, my head's in the way. You need to make sure the base coat of icing is dry. If you put the cornstarch on the still sticky icing, it's just going to make a sticky mess. Does that make sense? Did that answer it? Okay, so in the meantime, I added the little hay / star tips. I love tips. That's why I continue to use piping bags and couplers, because I like to switch my tips a lot, and I can't change that about myself. I don't even think I want to, but it's the same concept as the petal tip: squeeze, pull, and release. Squeeze, pull, and release. I just pulled this guy up here to do a second round. And this actually kind of demonstrates how not important the order is in this case. Sometimes the order you approach something is really important. It would have been smarter to do the details on this before I added that big, huge double-decker flower. I'm trying to keep my head out of the way. But if you don't, or if you mess up, just do it a different way. Ta-da! See? So I still added that little bit of detail. It would have been a little bit cleaner and nicer had I done it before I put this flower on here, but there's always a workaround, see? One last little tip. I should really start cutting these things out because I have gone over, but I kind of feel like I'm cheating y'all if I don't. If you want to blush the cheeks, you can use like colored powder like this. Little tip, whenever I use this kind of powder, you can spritz it. It's, what do we call this? I forgot what we call this, but it's Sugarbelle Brandon Michaels. It's just pretty shiny powder. It has a real name that Callie doesn't remember right now. But I usually spritz it in the lid if I'm using it like directly on a cookie versus not wanting to miss the whole thing. And just use a soft brush to add a little like touch right here. A lot of times I use Q-tips too, but wasn't sure my icing was going to be dry enough. But can you kind of see that little touch of color it adds? That's the hard thing about video classes too. Like I don't feel like the video always gives me the best lighting where I can show you exactly, but you can kind of see the little touch of pink. And it's little details like that that make people, it just delights people. That's the word that always comes to mind. But yeah, I just squirt it in the lid and work out of the lid, because you can also use these pumps to like spray all over your cookie and then spread it out with a brush like this. But for applications like that, use the lid. And then finally, we're going to use black icing and a 1 or 1.5 tip to add a little smile. You could also do this with a marker, like a black food color marker. I might try it. It's really scary and I'm probably going to mess up, but I'm just going to try it and be brave today. See, this is like the most rogue real class I think we've ever done. And I hope y'all liked it. I'm going to do it on this one, but we're just going to pipe a big happy smile. Not gonna lie, sometimes freehanding stuff like that just wigs me. Like sometimes I need to like grab a circular cutter and make a little template, but I make myself do it so I don't lose that charm of decoratedness, because sometimes I get hung up on it being perfect. He's got a sweet little mouth. If I could figure out what I did with the black food color pen, if you're more comfortable with this route, See, I'm too shaky to do this. I think that's why I don't like it. Now I know. If I don't overthink it and I just go for it, it's fine. You can use a food color pen too. And I think that looks a little bit more popular now, but it's scary because I get the shakes, but you know what I mean. Anyway, a few more things before I go. This is the cookie. I probably took the most long-winded way around that. I hope you feel like it was still cohesive with all of the other things I threw in there. But if you do have questions, let's ask them now. And while we're answering questions, I'll show you a few other things. I'm going to try this one again to see how I feel about putting the mouth on. We're putting a little bit of blush on him so he'll have pretty pink cheeks.
One question that came through
Yes.
is, what cookie cutter did you use? I know you mentioned it at the beginning, but if you can just reiterate it.
Yes, it is the skull from the 80-piece set at Michael's. I love that skull. If you go onto Instagram, I posted a post that showed a bunch of random cookies, and all of them are made with that skull. Here it is. Yeah, I think I'm normally like pretty anti food color marker, but I think I like that. See, I'm glad I tried it because even I learned something today. Okay, here's the skull. And like I said, it can be a basketball goal, it can be a cactus, it can be like a Day of the Dead, like a sugar skull. It can be, I see Dracula. I actually drew Dracula, but that cutter can be everything. That's one of my favorites, a crystal ball. Do we have any more questions? I'm going to talk about sprinkles just a little bit more.
It doesn't like there is any more, but everyone is loving this class and they're just saying thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. Okay, so since we are way out of time, I'm still going to do this for y'all. I do want to talk about sprinkles and accents one more time. If you are not comfortable at all piping, like the sunflowers, like I just showed you, I do want to encourage y'all to be creative and use what you have. I really like buying pre-made things like these and dressing them up to do my own thing with. You see these right here? These actually started out like that. But I just use this or these cool little things. You should hang on to these. I think I might qualify as a hoarder, but cool little things like this. You can take your own icing and personalize pre-made sprinkles. And I want to encourage you to do that too. So like if you see these little yellow flowers, they're kind of boring on their own, but all I have to do is take a dot of that same brown icing that I use to make the sunflower transfers. And then I have a bowl full of sunflowers that are, in the words of Sandra Lee, semi-homemade. And I love doing things like that. And I could go on and on. I had so many more ideas. This could have been a 2-hour class quite easily, but I probably better stop. But I just want to encourage people to use things that work for them and think outside of the box if something that I do does not work for you. Let me switch views real quick. I'm not even kidding. My assistant walked off as soon as I said that, or right before I said that. Okay, I'll switch views real quick. Since I went over, there's suddenly a lot of action. It's time for my little one to come home, but I really want to thank everybody for coming. I want to thank you for staying so much longer than I meant to take. I didn't realize this was going to take that long, and I appreciate you being here. I hope you learned something. If you have any more questions, if you head over to my Instagram or even Facebook, we'll post something on Facebook about the class. If you leave me questions, I'll go through and answer anything that I didn't get to, because I hate leaving people hanging. I wish I could like personally help everyone. And if there's anything else you would like to see or want to see, either rewatch it on YouTube or just like give me a holler on social, and I try my best to get back to everybody who does ask questions. And again, thank you everybody for coming. I had fun. And if anybody has any questions or anything else, just let me know. Thank you.